while. We've only been going for a couple of hours, but it's been very, very informative already. So I've actually learned quite a lot. It's been interesting to find out what's going on in Taiwan and how Taiwan is leading the world in ESG. So it's very exciting to see everything that's happening here. And the conference itself, it's a great conference, very well organized. And so far we've been having a lot of fun. So I suppose the most interesting part is really trying to convince people to adopt standards. One of the things we try to do as an organization is to get people to use standards as a way to report information. There's a lot of vested interests in that. A lot of people like the status quo. So it's one of the challenges is to basically be able to get people to move towards standards. So particularly the ESG standards. It's been very interesting to watch over the last couple of years. We were very concerned that there were so many different types of standards. So I've been very pleased that they're consolidated around the IFRS standards, which has been very beneficial. And once we've had certainty around that, that's made our jobs much easier. So we can then start to push forward with recommending ESG standards. Not at the state level, mainly at this point at the state level, places like California and New York. So having those standards and having them consolidated is making our jobs a lot easier. Right, so a lot of acronyms there. So for people watching this, they're not as scary as they sound, but having the global standards is imperative. And one of the things that we've been doing from the US is to try and convince people in the US not to come up with their own standards, which is the natural thing to do. And we've had a lot of help from companies who want to see, hey, I'm a multinational company. I only want to be able to, if I'm collecting all this information, I only really want to report it in one standard. I don't want to report it in one standard in Taiwan, one standard in China, another standard in Europe, another standard in the US. So for the stuff to happen and for climate reporting to really work, it's a global world, it's a global problem, you need global standards to address it. So I think that's something that's starting to happen now. So, there's a lot of things happening at the moment which are kind of, particularly in the US, which have been anti-climate standards, but I think the global momentum will carry us across the line. So it's good, and for us in the US, it gives us a good basis to convince people to start doing this. And then the standards themselves are important. Once companies are reporting, that's going to help with accountability and transparency and for people to take responsibility for emissions or any other type of activities they may be doing that have a negative impact on the climate. Yeah, so the industries that lead the way are the ones that have low emissions. The ones that have high emissions, not so keen. So that's kind of what it seems to boil down to. I think for us, in the United States at least, there are some states that are very interested in this, and there are some states that are not. And it really depends on where the majority of their income comes from. So California is very progressive in terms of climate legislation. So they, as opposed to Texas, which is going to be less keen on it, obviously because there's a large oil and gas industry there. So I think to some extent it really depends. One of the things that's going to happen, though, especially for multinationals, is they're going to have to report in Europe, or if they're going to have to report in Asia, it's really going to make, and once they get those processes down to report in those countries, then reporting in the US is going to be significantly easier. So as long as that trend continues, and that's why what's happening in Taiwan is really, really important. It's, being a leader is important, and people seeing you do that. And, this is what this conference is about. So I think it's, this is a critical moment for that to be happening. Right. So I think it's more the process of going through and understanding what you're doing and where your emissions are. A lot of companies don't actually realize, what their internal processes are. Not it's kind of across the organization rather than being central. So once you understand that, it gives you ability to make better decisions, to reduce waste, to get better efficiency, and to work out, where you can do things better. It's not sustainability. It's not really about, for companies, it can really help you make your operations more efficient as well. So I think a lot of companies recognize that. And even, if you look at the statistics, about 64% of companies are continuing on their climate initiatives in the US, even though they don't really announce that publicly because they see just the underlying business logic for it. Well, there's a lot involved in collecting this climate data. So I think one of the things is to start looking at how you need to change your internal processes in terms of collecting that information. So you need systems to collect that data, and you may not just really have the mechanisms in place to start collecting that information. So, for example, for carbon emissions, then identifying, your direct emissions, what they are, and having systems to start picking that information up. And if you're doing scope 3 disclosures, which is what are the carbon emissions of your suppliers, and then trying to start working with the suppliers and talking to them to address it. There's a lot of work to do in that regard. So obviously, scope 1 and scope 2. That's kind of the immediate stuff that's not so hard, but the scope 3 will present some challenges, and it's a matter of the whole business community working together and coming up with mechanisms to support that. So this is what we've found with putting data into an XBRL format is that it makes you really think about what is the information you're presenting and what is the message we're trying to get across. And when you have to put it in a digital format, it forces you to make that information unambiguous. So then as you go through, you can say, this doesn't really make sense because when we try to run it through a computer program, it gives us strange results. So then that gives you a better rigor, and then you start to look at your own internal processes and say, maybe we should be collecting this data differently. Maybe we're collecting the wrong data. So it really makes you look and focus on what are we actually doing, what are we trying to collect, and that's a valuable exercise because then you can understand how your business is operating better than it was before you do it.